I love these NSM talks, now called baby talks. I've always admired the people that could stand on a stage and have the courage to tell their story, often revealing glimpses of themselves and their struggles and bits of their lives outside of J&J. It's the rawness and the realness that connects us, not just as employees or coworkers, but as people. And so today, I'm standing on this stage to tell you a little bit about my story and my journey from darkness into light. I've been with J&J for 18 years, and sometimes I think about my time with J&J as my journey into adulting, because I started with J&J right out of college. And like many of you, all of my rites of passage in adulthood have been with J&J. And they've all been along that typical path that I always pictured when I was a kid. You go to college, get your MBA, buy a house, get married, have a few kids, progress your career, and retire with a pension and a 401k, sipping margaritas on the beach somewhere with your spouse, living happily ever after. And that's the path that I was on. Until about 5 years ago, that path came to an abrupt stop. And along that way, I lost my swagger. I started my career with McNeil. And when I was in my 20s, I started dating a guy named Mike. I had the opportunity to move to Minnesota to join the Target team. And Mike came with me. And we had a great time exploring Minnesota together, and he became a part of my J&J story. And we were married, and then we moved back to Pennsylvania, and we started a family, and I became pregnant with my first child. And while I was so excited to be pregnant, I was also scared to death. And I remember my first time in Babies R Us looking at all that stuff in the store thinking, oh my God, when am I ever going to be able to do with all this stuff? And I remember leaving there thinking, I need a stiff drink, but I couldn't drink because I was pregnant. But I was also worried about, am I going to be a good mom? And what if I can't get by on only a few hours of sleep? And the bigger my belly grew, the more my anxiety surfaced. My daughter, Hailey Grace Clement, was born in December 2010. She arrived 1 week early, and she weighed less than expected when she was born. She weighed 5 pounds, 5 ounces. And within an hour of her being born, the doctors took her to the NICU for observation because they said it seemed like she was aspirating. So I thought, okay, no big deal. I'm sure they're just being cautious. But she didn't come back to me that day, or the day after that. They kept her in the NICU. And I remember thinking, wow, I already did something wrong. What did I do to her when she was in my belly to make her end up in the NICU? And I remember being alone in my hospital room, in the maternity ward, and I could hear the other newborn babies with their moms in the rooms next to them. And I felt like a failure. And after 2 days, I had to leave the hospital to go home, but my baby had to stay there. And I remember getting into that car to drive home and looking at that empty car seat in the back. And it broke my heart to be leaving my struggling baby at the hospital. So I got home on a mission to do the one thing I could think to do to help my baby, which was to produce breast milk. And so I started pumping every half hour to get that liquid gold. And I remember filling up a really small vial, driving back to the NICU at the hospital, and proudly showing it to the NICU nurse who looked at it and said, "That's it?" And I felt failure. But I stayed tied to that pumping machine, frantically willing my body to produce more breast milk, and then feeling like a failure when I wasn't able to produce enough to be her sole source of sustenance. And let me just pause here. I know it's totally weird to be standing up on stage talking about breast milk, but we all work for J&J, and in my time here, I've had to talk diarrhea while selling Imodium, I've had to talk dual fluid while selling Sampro, and I've had to talk orgasms while selling KY, so I think we can talk a little bit about breast milk. My daughter was released from the NICU and came home 2 days before Christmas, which was a wonderful Christmas gift. But it was also the start of mommyhood getting real. And she was still a tiny baby. So every time I brought her to the pediatrician, they would tell me she was not on the height charts or on the weight charts. And when that happens, they call it failure to thrive. Failure to thrive. What a scary term for a new mother. I took it personally. And I felt like it meant that she was failing, and therefore I must be failing her. And the solution, of course, was more breast milk, breast is best. But after Hailey being in the NICU for 2 weeks, she was a lot more comfortable feeding from a bottle than she was from the breast. So I decided to do exclusive pumping, which basically meant I pumped everything that she would drink, and then she would drink it from the bottle. And this was a very tiring process because it took about an hour for me to pump each time because I produced less than other women and it just took that long. And it was physically and emotionally exhausting. And every single day I wanted to quit. And I could not wait until Hailey was going to turn 1 year old so that I could stop pumping, she could transition to drinking milk, she could start eating more solid foods and putting on weight and getting on the growth charts, and then I could get myself back to a more normal schedule, and I could feel more like myself again. But when Hailey was 9 months old, a word entered my life that I was not expecting. And suddenly, I was in the midst of a huge personal crisis. You know how they tell you, they say that God never gives you more than you could handle? This was more than I could handle. Having an infant and dealing with heartbreak, the loss of love, and all the technical implications that went along with this word. Lawyers, finances, custody. I was in the darkest place I'd ever been in. And then, of course, there was my daughter. All I could picture was this sad little girl who would have to wheel a suitcase back and forth between mommy's house and daddy's house. And I could just think, how could we do this to her? How could we bring this precious soul into the world to have her have to split time between both her parents? And of course, I was struggling with the idea of not seeing her every day. We all have to let go of our kids at some point. But I was having to do it when she was an infant. And all I could feel was this. I'll admit it, I was hurt. I felt abandoned. I was angry. This is not fair. Becoming the single mother of an infant was not in my plan. But I knew that I needed to move out of that dark place, and I knew that I needed to start to get some light into my life. And so I started to focus on love, because I love my daughter more than I disliked my ex-husband at that time. And so I started there. And these are some of the things I did to bring light back into my life. I started capturing all of those little moments that matter so much, and Johnson's calls these the moments that matter to new moms. And I can say that these moments, since I didn't have my daughter 100% of the time, meant even more to me. So things like bedtime, mealtime, bath time, playtime, I started capturing all of them on film and video. I was a little obsessed with it. And I would share these, not just with my family, but with her father's family as well, so that they could see glimpses of her life when she was with me. And the camera became a metaphor for my life. I had to adjust that aperture to let the light in. And when I let the light in, I discovered gratitude. There's so much to be thankful for, even in the dark moments, especially in the dark moments. And my daughter and I do prayers every night, and we always choose what we're thankful for. And for me, my list usually looks like this. I'm thankful for my daughter. I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for J&J, which challenges me and helps me grow and helps me provide for my family. And I am thankful that I am not in the same place now that I was in 5 years ago. At the suggestion of a J&J colleague, I checked out something called Divorce Care, which is a group that met once a week for about 3 months with the goal of helping everybody process and move through the turmoil associated with divorce. And while it was so not fun for me to go to this group every single week, it was so necessary in my healing, and I would recommend it to anybody who is struggling with the loss of a marriage. In Divorce Care, we talked about the cycle of grief, which is the same cycle that anybody goes through when you're losing someone or something that you love. And I was very much in this anger, depression stage. I was in that valley of despair. And I knew that I needed to move into that stage of acceptance so that I could return to a meaningful life. And if you think about it, that cycle of grief really isn't so different than how we process some of the changes in our business, is it? Turn to meaning with our consumers. I was in the valley, but here's how I got myself out of it. First, I had to mourn the loss. So much loss. Not just the loss of my husband, but of his family and friends that I had come to call my own. The loss of only being able to see my daughter, not all of the time. And the loss of my dream, the way that I thought things were going to be. Gone. I had to focus on taking care of myself so that I could take care of my daughter. And that meant I had to stop putting so much pressure on myself to breastfeed, and I had to stop pumping. I had to start eating better. I had to start getting more rest. I even had to tell my manager that I had to put my next career steps on hold temporarily so that I could focus on my family. I had to focus on what I could control and what I could not control. And to be honest with you, up until this point, I felt like I had everything pretty under control. I'm the type of person that figures out what I want, and I put a plan in place, and I go get it. I'm a J&J salesperson, and I don't take no for an answer. But suddenly, so much was out of my control. I couldn't make my husband stay married. I couldn't make my daughter gain weight faster. I couldn't even get my own body to produce more milk. The only thing I could do was to focus on my reactions to these things. And so I had to take a step back and learn to trust. I dug deep into my faith and tried to figure out what I believed in. And here's what I believe. I believe that God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, something bigger than us, can take bad situations and make something good come from it if you let it. An example of this is my mom had been living in Chicago for a number of years for her work, away from her family. And when I started going through all of this, she put her house up for sale and she moved to Pennsylvania to be with me. And now she lives in Pennsylvania near me and my sister and all her grandkids. And it's a blessing that continues till today. I believe that the right people will be put on your path at the right moments. There's not many people that I told what I was going through at this time, but I did confide in one coworker who I now consider a friend. And she and her husband opened up their hearts and their home to me, and they nurtured me when I was going through this. So thank you, Melanie. I had to trust that my daughter was going to be okay, and that I was going to be okay too. And then I knew I needed to let it go. And it was really around this time that I actually was going through the process of letting everything go that the movie came out. And that song that you've all heard a million times, that song took on a deeper meaning for me because it meant letting go of all of these things. And those lyrics became my lyrics because it represented my new life. And I'm still in the process of letting it go. That's part of why I'm on stage today. And now you guys are a part of that process for me, so thank you for listening to me because you're helping me let it go. But I also had to let go of this single parent stigma that I was carrying around with me that was keeping me from being my best self. And Tylenol's How We Family campaign helped me do that. When I first started with J&J, I felt like everybody fit a J&J mold. I felt like everybody was happily married with 2.5 kids and a dog and a white picket fence. And the way that we showed up to our consumers in media always showed a traditional family and always wearing wedding rings. But this campaign started showing non-traditional families, and that inspired me as an employee, and I thought, maybe it's okay if my family isn't traditional. It inspired me to embrace my life and to stop thinking of single parent as a dirty word. And so this is how I family. I am a proud single mom. And my mom plays an integral role in my life with Hailey. And my sister's family, well, her kids are as close to Hailey as siblings. Here's what I've learned. This is just a season, and seasons change. And when I think of all that pressure I put on myself to breastfeed and be that perfect mother, I look at this and I love it. It says I bottle fed and I breastfed, and before I knew it, they were all eating stale French fries off the minivan floor, and I was like, whatever, thanks for cleaning. And I love it because it's so real, and it shows us that what consumes us today may look really different tomorrow. I bought this print. It hangs in my daughter's playroom, and it's my favorite Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun. And I love the imagery it paints of a long, dark, cold, lonely winter with the sun rising up. And so for every single parent milestone I reached in my life, I heard, here comes the sun. So when we sold the marital home and I bought my new home, I heard, "Here comes the sun." When I took on a new position at work, I heard, "Here comes the sun." When I went on my first solo vacation with my daughter, I heard, "Here comes the sun." I've also learned that I am so much more than my present circumstances. My divorce was a moment in time. It's something that happened to me, but it doesn't define me, and it doesn't take away from who I am. And the same can be said for Johnsons. We are more than our recent circumstances, because nothing can take away from 100+ years heritage of innovation, of safety, and trust. Here's what my life looks like now. Raising a child looks way different than I ever imagined. I co-parent with Hailey's dad, which means we communicate and we make decisions about her together. And sometimes we even do things together as a family because we know that we are the most important people in her life. And in a sure sign of healing for me, this past fall, I actually asked Hailey's dad to join Hailey and I on a photo session I had set up. And the photographer said that we were her first divorced family. And I think she was more than a little nervous. But it was so important to me to capture images of Hailey with the two people that she loves the most in the world. Remember how I told you that I was so afraid that Hailey would be this sad little girl dragging a suitcase back and forth between two houses? 5 years later, this is Hailey's face, holding hands with her parents. She knows she is loved. And this is how Hailey views her family. She brought this home from school a few months ago. It's amazing to me because even though she's raised in two different homes, she clearly pictures herself as part of one loving unit. And that makes my soul so happy. Hailey's doing great, and I'm doing great too. And all of those feelings and emotions that I'd had before have been replaced with these. I can see the light in my life again, and I can feel the sun on my face again. It may have been a long, cold, lonely winter, but here comes the sun.
Here comes the sun.
Thank you.
Here comes the sun. I say it's all right.